Come on in, Marjolein, Willem, Craig. Craig is here. Craig. D'accord. Et je dois changer de chaise. Hop. And I sit here. Oh. Okay. And I need my... Hey, Craig.
Nice to see you.
So I'm now a little bit more relaxed, right? Because the ministers have gone. Yes. Hi. Oh. Okay. So each one of you, they're all great. You see their bio on the website. They're all fabulous people. They're staying here for the rest of the day. You can come get them. We're going to talk about your solutions, the complexity in scaling them, and then what can we do so that things don't disappear after a couple years, as we just heard is one of the main challenges. So we're talking big numbers. We start with you, Marjolein, so you're the CEO of Justdiggit. So tell us, what do you do concretely to address this important topic? Yeah, go for it. And give us a very concrete example while you do that as well, just so that we can picture it in our head.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm working for Justdiggit. Justdiggit is an organization that is aiming at large-scale landscape restoration in sub-Saharan Africa.
Yeah.
So what we do is, together with local partners, local implementing partners and communities, both pastoralists and farming communities, restore their lands, their degraded lands. Because I think in the previous session you have heard that a lot of land in Africa, 65% of the land is degraded. So there is a huge opportunity to restore that. And we work with very low-tech, low-cost interventions that are highly scalable. So we make sure that we inspire first communities, because when we talk about landscape restoration, we also talk about not only talk about restoring land, but also about restoring mindsets, about really inspiring people, giving them hope again, showing that restoration is possible. I think there it all starts. And then from there on, there is a lot of education. There are train-the-trainer models that we implement together with local organizations. And for example, we use rainwater harvesting techniques. People that know Justdiggit, we're quite well known for digging the half-moon-shaped buns, the water buns. It's a rainwater harvesting technique. When it rains, the topsoil of the land is most of the time so degraded that when it rains, you have only floods. So when you open up the top layer, water can infiltrate the soil again, and then the natural seeds that are still in there sprout or reseed with seeds that we grow in women-empowered grass seed bank programs. But another very scalable technique is farmer-managed natural regeneration. And we do that in, for example, central Tanzania. We are working there with big communities, in total with 200,000 farmers and their families, bringing back trees on farmland. And by bringing back trees on farmland, you have triple profits. You have, like, of course, the grass, the trees are coming back. You restore the water in the soil, so the soil is improving, and you also make the land more resilient for climate change.
Yeah.
So,
so what you explain is that these techniques are also local techniques that have been used, that have had the proof made over the years, and that you, in a way, are reintroducing them in the different practices.
Exactly. It's very, for us, it's essential, it's crucial to work with local knowledge.
That's what we heard before.
Yeah, and that's and with local communities, because when it's not local based, local owned, I don't think it can be sustainable in a way.
Thank you. Let me turn to you then, Ineke. So you work with Rabobank. So you're the banker in that panel, sort of. Okay, it's okay, because we heard the big call to action for finance, insurance, and companies in general. So tell us about where you come in that land restoration as a banker developing financial tools to accelerate that change.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me, by the way, in this wonderful venue.
Isn't it
it's
nice?
So nice.
Yeah.
So I work for a company called Smallholder Agroforestry Finance. I'll call it SAF or SAF from now on. So it's a spin-out basically of Rabobank, which is the banking entity. What we aim to do is finance similar projects like Justdiggit, where we help small-scale farmers to plant trees intercropping with their current cash crop. So it could be maize, cocoa that they have right now, and they plant additional trees, which have all the benefits that you just provided. What we've seen is that initially we looked at grant funding for these type of projects, and that's fantastic, but you don't...
money given by
donors
philanthropy
never have to be repaid
or, yeah.
by, for instance, USAID or Bezos Earth
Or not
Fund,
anymore,
that type
but,
of
yeah,
exactly.
traditional
I'll
donors,
come
yeah.
to that later. So we realized that this is actually quite hard to match exactly with the project, or it's not available when you need it. So we said, why don't we set up a blended finance structure, meaning we'll have a bit of grants, but that then de-risks, so it absorbs any first losses that may occur in the future, so other financiers feel comfortable to step in. So we're setting up a fund-like structure that will then lend to these projects so they can start training the farmers, planting the trees. And actually, we're using the carbon market as a means to an end. So we don't think carbon markets in itself are so fantastic, but you could use it as a means to repay the loans. So we give the loans, trees are planted, Acorn, a Rabobank entity, will then measure based on satellite footage how much the trees grow. They can also calculate how much carbon is sequestered in those trees. And then for each ton of carbon, they issue 1 carbon credit that is sold by companies that are willing to first reduce their footprint, and this is important. They shouldn't just buy those credits and continue whatever they're doing. They should first reduce, and on top of that, buy these credits. And then with the money from these carbon credits, we pay the project implementation, we pay the farmers for their efforts, so they have additional income, which helps for their personal livelihoods, and we use a portion to repay the loan that we gave in the beginning. Once the loan is fully repaid, that portion that used to be for interest and repayment will go to the farmers.
Did you all get that? She's good, huh? At explaining things, because it's complex, huh? It's a lot of terms. Okay.
I'll try to make it simple and not
you.
banker-like.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, Craig, you next. So you work with the World Resources Institute, and there, the part of that problem that you're focusing on has to do with data, right? So can you tell us what it is that you're trying to engineer there to try and help develop the techniques that we just heard about?
Yeah, sure. So if I start to explain the Land and Carbon Lab at the World Resources Institute, then I'll start talking about breakthroughs in Earth monitoring. And I'll talk about the fact that most monitoring misses large parts of our planet. So one of the things that we're trying to do is to create the foundational research which allows us to monitor grasslands, figure out where the expansion of agriculture is going. We're trying to look at how ecosystems are being converted and see that on a day after it happens. And one of the key research areas that we're working on is how do you monitor restoration projects at scale in the first 2 years?
And that's super hard because as much as it's easy to monitor what's happening with forest cover because they're big and we can see them, restoration in the first 2 years is just small things.
That's right. Things don't grow very quickly, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what we're effectively actually doing is trying to scale trust.
Yeah.
So what I mean by that is, like our restoration teams work with people that are interested in investing in restoration projects. And one of the first questions they'll ask us is, okay, how do I independently verify that the investments I'm making are leading to some form of impact?
To complement what Ineke is doing.
Exactly right. And so this is a really hard problem to solve at scale. So what we do is we use very high resolution satellite imagery and combine it with technologies that companies, and we're working with companies like Meta, that they use to detect like faces in photos or change 2D imagery to 3D imagery. And we turn that on the satellite data, and which allows us to do things like count every single tree on the planet and measure the height of all tree canopies at a 1 meter resolution on the planet at incredible accuracy. And what that allows us to do, it gives us this kind of level of verification in combination with locally designed, locally monitored products, which gives you that element of trust between the finance and the restoration projects. And that's kind of like the core of what we try and do. We try and make it open and freely available so we can kind of raise up that level of monitoring. So, you know, when we're scaling to billions of hectares, we have the technology and the infrastructure that's capable of actually monitoring it.
Yeah. Thanks, Craig. So for all of you interested in the data part of the picture, you come to Craig. Everything he does is open source, so he's your person to come to after that panel. Now, Willem, so these are parts of that huge solution, and you are the founder of Commonland, and your approach is to take a systems approach to that problem and try to connect the dots between everything that we've heard up to now, correct? So tell us, how do you do that? Because that sounds complex to me.
It is complex. Yes, I'm indeed the founder of Commonland, and Commonland was founded in 2013 based on an approach to bring, let's say, the scientific part of social innovation and ecological restoration together at the landscape scale. So we developed a framework called the 4 returns framework. So each
The 4 returns?
The 4 returns framework.
Yeah.
So each degraded landscape is characterized by 4 losses.
Yeah.
A loss of purpose, a loss of community, a loss of biodiversity, and a loss of finance,
Yep.
economics. That means that at the restored landscape, you need to return inspiration, ROI. You need to return community, social returns, biodiversity or natural returns. And then the sustainable financial returns will come automatically. It's not easy.
Is that
Because
right,
you
Ineke?
need to think in zoning,
She's
and you need to
nodding,
understand,
but,
we'll come back to that. You
Okay.
need to understand what the landscape is, and that's why we have we made this explicit combination of 3 zones. A natural zone, a combined zone where you combine biodiversity and productivity, and an economic zone which is basically hard infrastructure and industry and cities
Yeah.
and urban areas and roads and whatever. So that means that you need to look from infrastructural angle towards a landscape.
Yeah.
It's a green industrial, and let's say it's an upcoming holistic landscape restoration industry that we foresee. And of course you need time. So we need to stop thinking in projects. We need to think in processes of at least a few decades, because this takes
We
time.
heard 100 years earlier, yeah.
100 years is
It's
super.
good.
We say minimum 20 years, because for people to think in 100 years is quite tough.
Yeah.
But minimum 20 years is something that people, especially pension funds and some large investors, will understand. So what we did is we implemented projects since 2013 using this framework, whether in 5 countries, large areas above 100,000 to 1 million hectares.
Yeah, so
so
that's
let's say the size from Luxembourg to the size of a quarter of the Netherlands. And,
That's still small
and that's still small, but it's big for
kidding.
people if you live there.
Right.
And what we now see is that the narrative, because you can measure it in generic KPIs indicators as well as specific ones, that you see that this process of social innovation and ecological restoration, the technicalities, combined, that it is accepted and people buy into it. People who live there.
Yeah.
Because we first need to have people who, this is about stakeholder management. People need to understand that they can work towards beautifying their own countryside. So the next step is now that we are now working in more than 20 countries.
Yeah.
The next step is that people increasingly see, and especially the business people and the financiers, see that we need to work towards a landscape finance assessment, and from there towards a landscape, and that's a part of Ineke, a landscape finance blended fund. Just one example, if you look at the Valencia disaster in October last year in Spain, 600,000 hectares where it was a water catchment of 600,000 hectares. 30,000 hectares were affected. More than 200 people died.
Yeah.
60,000 houses were damaged. The cost was 14 billion euros. Only one water catchment in Spain because of a heavy weather event combined with landscape degradation over decades and sometimes centuries. So we are talking about a billion-dollar industry. The insurance companies in Spain needed to pay out 3.9 billion euros,
Yep.
the biggest amount ever in Spain. They set up a fund for 14 billion euros, which was never done before in a country like Spain. And this is only one water catchment in the Iberian Peninsula. They have hundreds. In the Mediterranean, they have hundreds. So what does it mean? We need to think from an industrial angle where you need to use two words, holistic, because this is about bottom-up and combining top-down, and long-term. And that also makes the difficult issue with the financiers that they need to buy into this long-term from a risk perspective. And yeah, I think that will come. The more heavy weather events we have, like in Los Angeles, and especially in the Western world, because there's insurance companies behind it. But of course, this is happening everywhere.
But our budget in most of our countries, you mentioned Spain, are acted on and voted annually, right?
Yeah.
Not for 20 years, unless it's about infrastructure, unless it's about roads, unless it's about bridges and whatnot.
But the real infrastructure are rivers, are landscapes, is the ecology. The ecology should drive the economy, not the other way around. And this is the way how to make it practical.
So that's what we need to change. We need to consider this project as we've been
exactly. And what we see is that we have developed a kind of motor of this landscape industry that people understand bottom up and increasingly also top down, because governments need to buy into this, of course.
Marjolein, at your level, because again, we're talking about scaling, that's the title of this conversation. What's the main challenges that you are facing in terms of scaling your model? And I just want to take my friend out there that I'm not having a counter. I can go on for an hour. It's fine with me, but I don't have countdown. So I'm taking ownership of this stage while you figure it out. Marjolein, we have all our time.
I have time, so that's nice. No, and time is exactly, I think, the biggest challenge. When we're talking about landscape restoration, about degradation, we see that, we're losing lots of land, lots of hectares of land every day. So we really have to scale up fast. I think that is our biggest challenge. But how to do that? And then, of course, finance also comes in. So I think looking at where we are standing now, we know what works, we know what the interventions are, we know the communities that can do it, the communities that can restore their own lands. We have the techniques that are there, we have the knowledge, but we have to bridge the gap between the communities and the two. And that is funding for a big part.
So it's all come down to the money, which I don't know. I mean, I think there is obviously this change of mindset that needs to operate so that we consider ecosystem and landscape as the basis of what we do and not on the... So obviously that's the main shift that we need. And still, while this is happening, the funding aspect is critical, right? So you showed us that financial engineering you're putting together, but how do you scale this?
Good question. We talked a little in advance with Willem, so I agree with his point. You need patient capital. You need people...
What does that mean?
So at least 15 years in our case. So I agree with your 20. So you need people that are willing to commit to 20. And we're actually at an interesting crossroads. And I'm going to steal your comment, Willem, so all kudos to Willem. It's an interesting way. So one, you need to see, is there value in this? So we're using, for instance, the carbon credit as a value in this project, which makes it interesting for financiers because they get repaid. There's a repayment mechanism based on the carbon credit. You can do that with other things too. So that is the carrot. That is what the investors typically like. You get your money back, you make a bit of interest on it. But then there's also the stick. You mentioned insurance companies had to pay out millions.
Yep.
And typically, the investors that have a long-term vision are investors like institutional investors, like pension funds, insurance companies,
reinsurance, maybe.
And so reinsurance, pension funds, and insurance companies. What do? They typically invest in portfolios of shares, and that value is at risk now because resources are at risk and the companies are at risk. So that could be the stick to drive them towards this. And if you then can find a way to build in a repayment mechanism, then that's, I think, the way to generate that patient capital. But the mindset needs to be open for it. People need to be okay with the 15-year commitments.
Does that sound feasible to you?
I think this century it will come. So I'm realistic because the more heavy weather events we will get, especially in the Western world, where people are insured, the money will finally find its way. I'm a bit hesitant and reluctant about the, let's say, the more developing world because people are not insured.
Yes.
And so if these things happen in Pakistan or Ethiopia, it will be more difficult. Yeah. And so I hope at a certain moment that, especially through long-term commitment of governments with banks, with insurance companies, and especially beverage, ag, and governments that really understand these issues, like we heard from Saudi Arabia before, that they will set up a long-term blended funds at landscape level to make this possible.
Something to bring to the Mongolia COP jointly after that when we catch them. I think they're gone. Craig, for this to work, if it's based on carbon credit or biodiversity credit, or we've heard before maybe land regeneration credits, we're going to need the data, all right? So the data is key as part of that solution.
That's right.
What's the main challenge you are facing in the type of model you're building? Same thing, to bring them at this global level and then for people to know how to use it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so I guess there's a number of big challenges and small challenges, and I'll give you one tiny challenge first. We've got all this wonderful modeling. We've got all this fantastic ability to figure out what's happening on the planet. What we don't actually have very much of is the locations of where restoration is happening. What I would call as polygons, right? Just the delineation of the places where things are happening. And so if you have that, then it's possible to monitor. If you don't have that, you tend to get it wrong. And so at the very basic stage, a very small stage, the more polygons on a map, the better. So that's one thing. The other thing is there's a huge amount of investment currently going into startups and nature tech startups to provide services to the private market to be able to do this type of restoration monitoring. The problem with that, they're starting from a point of a very low level of like scientific and technical discovery. And so what's happening is, tens of millions are going into these startups, great, but they're having to They have to reinvent their research that hasn't been done yet, and each has to do that on their own. And so, one of the reasons we exist is to try and raise up that level to the point where those startups don't have to do that, and they can focus on building the products which are useful for the market, you see. So that if there's a way of reorienting some finance to the fundamental research, then I think we actually raise up everything else.
Okay, but the funds that you're getting, because it's funded, your lab is funded by Bezos Earth, right?
That's right, yeah.
That can provide that, hopefully. I mean, if billionaires cannot do that, then who's going to do it now,
that's right, yeah. That's
they can provide that funding for the fundamental research that then can allow startups to connect and piggyback,
that's
right?
Correct.
So that's the model. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I have the prompter. We don't have much time left. And so there is one point actually I wanted to raise with you, because we're all sitting here talking about land regeneration in a part of the world that we're not from, right? And so we heard that one of the key challenge that we're all facing is to work with local communities in all these projects. So can you tell me what is the key principle or aspect of engaging with community that you would like to see more of?
So we work closely with Acorn, and they work with local implementation partners.
So your partners are?
Yeah. So for me, key in these local implementations are working with project councils. So, for instance, the local village chief is in that council. The farmers are represented. There are proper grievance mechanisms also for if something is not going according to plan. But I think that involvement is key. And also, I think we heard Minister Dr. Osama say it's native species, so really cater to the local needs and what is common practice in those countries.
If I turn to you, Marjolein, it's part of your business model to have this approach, right?
Yes, I think it's essential. It's key. Otherwise, we can't do it. So we design our programs together with local partners that are really embedded in the communities we're working in. And we also see that that is the only way it's adopted, but it's also sustainable, because it should be locally owned, locally led. If that's not the case, then when the project stops, or when the 3-year time of hardcore implementation support is over, then there is no project anymore. So it's really embedded in the communities, and I think that also makes it strong, that it's making use of traditional knowledge, of techniques that are practiced. Sometimes it's more forgotten knowledge that will revive when people are seeing, for example, rotational grazing. What the Maasai, we're working with a lot with Maasai communities in the southern part of Kenya and northern Tanzania. But they always were tracking around, and because of now different structures, they're staying in the same village, which causes degradation of land, overgrazing. But when you bring back together with the communities, you restore spots of land and you start a rotational grazing management system, then you kind of relate to their traditional knowledge and the way they always lived. So you implement old techniques in a new setting.
Willem, you'll have the last word with a word of wisdom, as you've been in that space for the longest, probably out of all of us.
Now, maybe to also to build upon what Marjolein said is what we see is pride. That's number one. The second one is you need to understand their spiritual connection with the land, and even everyone has that. That means a sense of belonging, listening very carefully, using the knowledge that is already there, and then let's say help with the right technologies or whatever and connections to make it happen. But pride and proudness is super important. We call that the return of inspiration. It's one of our first, let's say, indicator. If you don't have that and don't follow, let's say, the indicators that are under the return of inspiration, so you need to maximize ROI before you start to talk about the other things.
Yeah, and I think
it works.
That's what all of us need to do, and that the pitch you've been making.
Yeah.
We are stopping. Thank you very much for your contribution, Ineke, Craig, Willem, and Marjolein. Thank you very much.